On July 14th, 2026, Lake Powell sat at 3,524.003 feet above sea level. 34 feet. That's all that's left between this massive reservoir and its hydroelectric turbines shutting down. We're not talking about a slow fade or a temporary dip. I mean a hard stop, potentially as early as December of this year. After that, a dam that keeps millions of homes lit simply won't make power anymore. One of the big engines of the American West is basically being turned off because there's no water. Its water level is now just 23.54% of its capacity. You can see this bone-colored ring stretching for hundreds of feet up the canyon walls, a stark reminder of where the water used to be. But here's the kicker, the detail that really tells you what's going on. In the spring of 2026, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which is the federal agency in charge of the river, did something pretty desperate. They ordered an emergency release of up to 1 million acre-feet of water from the Flaming Gorge Reservoir. That's hundreds of miles upstream in Wyoming and Utah. They were essentially draining a healthy reservoir, sacrificing its recreation economy, just to force feed Lake Powell. All to bump its water level up by a few precious feet. All to keep the lights on for a few more months. The problem with the Colorado River isn't just one dry year, or even some huge drought. It's a fundamental breakdown in the system. And the craziest part isn't that the reservoirs are at historic lows. It's that the West is now paying itself not to use water it was already supposed to get. So, today, July 16th, 2026, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California approved a deal. The federal government will pay them $325 per acre-foot for up to 200,000 acre-feet of water. Not to build a new canal, not to fund a desalination plant. This money is simply for them to leave the water in Lake Mead. To just not turn on the tap. This is where we're at with the Colorado River. It's like an artery for 40 million people, a lifeline for 5.5 million acres of farmland, and now it's running on emergency bailouts and slowly eating itself alive. This whole system, designed 100 years ago, is now facing a reality it was never built for. And honestly, time is running out. To really get what's happening, you have to go back to a hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on November 24th, 1922. 7 guys, representing 7 western states, signed a document called the Colorado River Compact. They were basically carving up the river. They drew a line on a map at a spot called Lee Ferry, Arizona. Everything upstream was the upper basin, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Everything downstream was the lower basin, Arizona, California, and Nevada. Each basin got 7.5 million acre-feet of water every year. That's 15 million acre-feet total. Then, in 1944, a treaty with Mexico added another 1.5 million acre-feet to that bill. So, 16.5 million acre-feet promised. Every single year. It seemed like such a simple, elegant solution. A political win, but it was also a huge mathematical screw-up. The guys in 1922 used the best data they had. But that data happened to be from an abnormally, almost unbelievably, wet period. They looked at a decade of really high river flows and just figured that was normal. They literally wrote laws based on a fantasy. They wrote laws for a river that just didn't exist. Now, modern science, especially looking at tree rings, has shown us the brutal truth. The long-term average flow of the Colorado River over centuries isn't 16 or 17 million acre-feet. It's closer to 13, maybe 14 million. Today, stuck in the worst drought in 1,200 years, and with climate change slowly cooking things, recent inflows have been closer to 11 million acre-feet. This is the big problem with the river. It's got a structural deficit. The system is legally bound to deliver at least 2 million more acre-feet of water every year than nature usually provides. For decades, you couldn't really see this deficit. They just covered it up by taking from the system's 2 giant savings accounts. These 2 colossal reservoirs were built to smooth out a dry year or two. Lake Powell, held back by Glen Canyon Dam, and Lake Mead, behind the famous Hoover Dam. They were the security blanket, the guarantee. Now, they're basically measuring how fast things are falling apart. For years, states have been using water they don't have, paying a debt to a legal lie by draining the real-world savings in those reservoirs. And those accounts are almost empty now. This deficit wasn't a mistake. It was always going to happen, built right into the law of the river from day one. And within that law, there is another huge omission. Out of the 30 federally recognized Native American tribes in the Colorado River Basin, 22 of them have major legal rights to its water. Rights that, in a lot of cases, are older than those of the states that signed that 1922 compact. Altogether, they have claims to about 3.2 million acre-feet per year. But they weren't even at the table in Santa Fe. They were just ignored in the calculations. For 100 years, many of those tribes didn't have the money, the political muscle, or the actual pipes and canals to use their full legal share. That water just got absorbed by other users. Now, as tribes start building the systems to claim the water they're owed, they're basically trying to collect on a debt from a bank that's already broke. The water was promised to them. It was also promised to California and Arizona and farmers in Colorado. It was promised to everyone. And now the river just can't deliver. The water on paper is a ghost. The water in the river is all that's left. The whole system depends on two structures, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. They're not just lakes. They're these huge, complicated hydraulic machines, and both are getting dangerously close to breaking points that we've never seen before. Let's start with Lake Powell. It's stunningly beautiful, with red rock canyons filled with deep blue water. Its main job is to be the upper basin's primary storage bank, catching all that snowmelt from the Rocky Mountains. It makes sure the upper basin states can send their required 7.5 million acre-feet of water downstream past Lee Ferry to the lower basin. The dam that created it, Glen Canyon Dam, is an engineering marvel. A concrete arch 710 feet high. Its turbines can make 1,320 megawatts of electricity, enough to power over 500,000 homes. That power isn't just nice to have. It's how they fund environmental programs, salinity control, and endangered species recovery all across the basin. The money from Glen Canyon's electricity is really what holds a lot of the river's management together. Now, here's what I think nobody on the news is properly explaining. The danger isn't just a low lake. The real problem is a series of hard physical cutoffs. The first is called minimum power pool. For Glen Canyon Dam, that's at 3,490 feet. Below that, the water level is too low to flow into the pipes that feed the turbines. The generators go silent. The money stops flowing. The power grid gets shaky. As of mid-July 2026, the lake is at 3,524 feet. That's only 34 feet away. Federal forecasts, assuming this drought continues and winter runoff keeps failing, are warning that we could hit this point by December 2026, maybe spring of 2027. We're talking months, not years, until the financial heart of the upper Colorado River goes dark. The second cutoff is even more final. That's dead pool. For Lake Powell, it's at 3,370 feet. At that level, the water drops below the dam's lowest outlets. Water just can't flow downstream to Lake Mead and the lower basin states anymore, not even with gravity. Millions of acre-feet would just be stuck in the bottom of the canyon. A stagnant, unreachable pool. If Glen Canyon Dam hits dead pool, it would essentially mean the end of the Colorado River as one connected system. It would sever the artery. Downstream is the other giant, Lake Mead, the biggest reservoir in the whole U.S. Its full level is 1,229 feet. Today, it's at 1,042.28 feet. It's this huge, quiet expanse of water reflecting the desert sky. but it's the lifeblood for 25 million people in Arizona, Nevada, and California. Hoover Dam, which holds it back, is a global icon. It symbolizes America's ability to control nature. But that power relies on pressure, on the immense weight of all that water piled up behind it. And here, we're looking at a different kind of mechanical problem. It's called cavitation. As the lake level drops, what they call the hydraulic head, which is the pressure from the column of water above the turbine intakes, it drops too. When that pressure gets too low, around 1,035 feet for Hoover Dam, something dangerous starts to happen. The water rushing into the turbines moves so fast, it creates tiny vacuum pockets, like bubbles of empty space. As these bubbles move through the system, the pressure around them suddenly increases, and they just implode. Violently, these supercharged bubbles collapsing release this shockwave of energy. It's strong enough to rip chunks of solid steel right off the turbine blades, to blast concrete. So, long before Hoover Dam even hits its own minimum power pool level of 950 feet, or its dead pool of 895 feet, cavitation could effectively destroy its turbines from the inside out. The relationship between these two reservoirs is pretty tense. A brutal codependency. Back in 2007, facing a drought that felt unprecedented at the time, the federal government put out the interim guidelines. These were rules designed to coordinate how Powell and Meade operated. The main idea was equalization. If Powell was high and Meade was low, Powell would release extra water to boost Meade up. Basically, for most of the last 2 decades, Lake Powell has been systematically drained to keep Lake Meade, and by extension, the lower basin, from collapsing. The upper basin states watched their main savings account get bled dry to satisfy the huge thirst of the cities and farms downstream. This created a lot of simmering resentment. One savings account was essentially subsidizing an overdrawn checking account. These are the rules that have been running the river for almost 20 years. And on December 31st, 2026, they expire. Everything is back up for discussion. Which brings us to the stalemate. It's a political crisis unfolding right alongside the water crisis. The federal government, with Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Kalimlum-Tutin leading the charge, saw this coming. She gave the 7 basin states a deadline. Come up with a plan, together, for how to manage the river after 2026. A plan that actually acknowledges the new, drier reality. She demanded cuts of 2 to 4 million acre feet. That's a huge number. It's like 1/3 of the river's entire flow. The deadline was February 14th, 2026. The states missed it. Now they're basically in a cold civil war over the little water that's left. The battle lines are the same ones they drew in 1922. On one side, you have the upper basin states, with negotiators like Becky Mitchell from Colorado. She's really firm. The upper basin already lives with what the water actually provides. Their water comes from snow falling in the Rockies each winter. They can't use more than what Mother Nature provides. They argue that the lower basin relying on Lake Meade's storage to live beyond its means is over. The lower basin, they insist, finally has to manage its own water budget. On the other side are the lower basin states, each with their own desperate calculations. Tom Bushotsky represents Arizona, a state that, because of its junior water rights, has already taken the earliest and most painful cuts under the current shortage rules. The Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile canal that keeps the state alive, has had its allocations slashed. Arizona is fighting to hold on to what little it has left. Then there's California, represented by folks like J.B. Hamby, who chairs the Colorado River Board. California's Imperial Irrigation District has the biggest and oldest, most senior water rights on the entire river. In the weird world of Western water law, old rights come first. California's rights are almost bulletproof. Legally, they get their full share before new users like Arizona get a single drop. Any plan that forces California to take significant cuts is, for them, a non-starter. And then there's Nevada, Las Vegas. This city of crazy extravagance right in the driest desert in North America. Its lead negotiator, John Ensminger, of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, sounds just tired, but totally practical. He's publicly criticized the tired rhetoric and entrenched positions of the other states. Nevada has become a global example for how to save water in cities. They recycle almost 100% of their indoor water. They've banned ornamental grass. Las Vegas uses way less water than it did 20 years ago, even with a growing population. Ensminger argues they've done their part. They're watching. As their spokesman Bronson Mack says, the lake get close to dead pool, but he insists it would not be dead pool for Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is a nod to the deep water intake straw they drilled into the bottom of Lake Mead. That was a $1 billion insurance policy against this exact catastrophe. The negotiations are just a tangled mess of law, science, and everyone trying to survive politically. Back on May 1st, 2026, the lower basin states, unable to agree with their upstream neighbors, submitted their own fragmented proposal. It promised to save 3.2 million acre-feet through 2028. The upper basin shot it down almost immediately. They saw it as more of the same. More accounting tricks and temporary fixes, not the real change that's needed. That real change is a mathematical idea that's become a battle cry. The lower basin has to learn to live on less than 7.5 million acre-feet. California alone is entitled to 4.4 million of that share. They've never had to take a mandatory cut that big. While the politicians argue, the river's physics just keeps on doing its thing. The problem isn't just a lack of snow. The ground itself is now part of the crisis. Decades of drought have left the soil in the watershed parched, like a sponge. In recent years, even when there's a good snowpack in the mountains. The spring runoff has been terribly low. The melting snow just soaks into the thirsty earth before it can ever reach a stream. Dry winds pull moisture from the snowpack directly into the air, a process called sublimation. The snow just disappears without ever turning into water. You can't even look at the mountains in March anymore and know what the river will look like in June. The system is just too broken. And this is where we have to talk about who uses the most water on the river. It's not the fountains at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. It's not swimming pools in Phoenix or lawns in Los Angeles. Cities and industry use less than a quarter of the river's water. Almost 80% of the Colorado River goes to agriculture. A huge chunk of that goes to water-heavy crops like alfalfa, grown in the desert sun to feed cattle. So, essentially, we're using a shrinking river to grow food for cows in some of the driest places on Earth. Any real fix for the Colorado's deficit has to deal with this reality. But those agricultural water rights, like California's, are some of the oldest and most legally protected in the West. Taking that water would require a political fight that nobody's really been willing to take on yet. Instead, we have moments like today, July 16th, 2026, the day the federal government agreed to pay the biggest water district in Southern California hundreds of millions of dollars to leave 200,000 acre-feet of water in a dying lake. It's a one-time boost. A band-aid to keep Lake Mead from falling off a cliff before that December 31st deadline. It's like printing money to put off a recession. It doesn't create new water, it doesn't fix the underlying problem, it just buys a few more months. It's basically an admission that the system, as it was designed, has failed. The only tool left is the checkbook. The whole operation is now just held together by emergency measures and the threat of federal intervention. Commissioner Touton has repeatedly warned that if the states can't agree, she will step in. The Bureau of Reclamation could, theoretically, just impose cuts on everyone. It's a legal gray area, a move that would almost certainly lead to a decade of lawsuits ending up at the Supreme Court. But the alternative might be worse. The alternative is watching the dams go silent and the canals run dry while the lawyers are still arguing. The situation is speeding up. This slow-moving disaster of the last 20 years has just entered a faster phase. Those emergency releases from Flaming Gorge weren't a drill. Missing that deadline in February wasn't just a negotiating tactic. The frantic deal-making in July isn't some long-term plan. These are all signs of a system that's in its final stages of breaking down. Each action is more panicked than the last. Each solution is more expensive and temporary. We're watching a 100-year-old legal framework, built on bad data, crumble under the pressure of a 21st century climate. So, 3 big questions are hanging over the 7 states of the Colorado River Basin tonight. First, what happens on January 1st, 2027? On that day, the 2007 interim guidelines, which are the only rules coordinating the 2 big reservoirs, just disappear. Without a replacement, the river could descend into legal and operational chaos, a free-for-all ruled only by that rigid, century-old law of the river that everyone agrees is obsolete. Second, can a system built on fixed water allocations even work anymore in an age where the weather is totally unpredictable? The main idea of the 1922 Compact was stability, supposedly predictable amounts of water, year after year. Climate change has replaced that stability with whiplash. It's not a choice between a good year and a bad year anymore. It's between a catastrophic year and one that's just less catastrophic. And finally, what does it mean when the defining feature of the American West, the very water that allowed its cities to exist, can now only be managed by paying people not to use it? The water isn't a shared resource to be divided anymore. It's become a problem to be dealt with, a crisis to be funded, a ghost haunting the canals and pipelines that crisscross a drying landscape. The 200,000 acre-feet of water bought today is sitting in Lake Mead, a temporary breath of relief measured in vertical inches. But the underlying problem, that 2 million acre-feet promised on paper, but missing from the snowpack, that's still out there. It's a debt that gets bigger every year, a bill written in the sky that the river just can't pay anymore. The water that should be flowing towards Hoover Dam right now is already gone. It's soaked into the soil of Utah. It evaporated from the surface of Lake Powell. It was promised 100 years ago to a future that never came. And deep inside Glen Canyon Dam, the water level is dropping, slowly falling toward that line at 3,490 feet, where the turbines will finally, after 60 years of service, go quiet.